You're listening to The Sound of Young America. I'm Jesse Thorn, America's radio sweetheart. My guest on the program is author Austin Grossman. His book is Soon I Will Be Invincible, a novel about the life and travails of a team of superheroes and their nemesis, a supervillain. Austin, welcome to The Sound of Young America.
Thank you so very much.
We were talking off camera, off microphone earlier when you walked in here about video games. You were a video game designer professionally before you quit to go to grad school in English literature.
Yes, although we never quit in video games. We simply become consultants.
Do you get the big bucks now?
No, I get the same amount of bucks in smaller increments without healthcare.
I was wondering if the secret to success in the video game industry is a PhD in English.
If it is, I will be the first to know about it.
What does a video game writer do? What is the role of a video game writer?
Oh, it's a sad life, and it depends a little bit with the video game and how the team organizes it. Video games have become used to the idea that they need writers on staff. Like a primitive amoeba in the early eras of our planet, they have absorbed into it the little writer organism, but they're still trying to digest it or work it into their little metabolism in some way. So it varies from team to team. Sometimes the producer of the game is the kind of visionary, so that person will think up the story concept and the plot and the characters and just hand it off to the writer to do dialogue. Other ones are other teams are like, well, you're the writer. Think of a story and some characters. They're kind of like the headless horseman. They still have a head, but it's like tucked under their arm, like they're carrying it around. They're like, you're the writer. Make the story for us. So different teams work different ways. The video game industry is still getting to the video game industry production generally models itself on software development paradigms, so they're still getting used to the idea that they're in the entertainment business. So that's a long way of saying that it varies. But when you get down to it, you show up at your desk and you crank out dialogue and narration, and sometimes you stage little scenes that we call cutscenes, the little video segments that happen before and after all the fighting.
I think we'll all remember those from Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective.
Exactly. So, the biggest task of a writer is, to me, to figure out how to tell the story, to figure out how to cram story into this new crazy medium where players get to do what they want. And so your protagonist gets to do what they want. You have to figure out how to stage story under those terms, and that varies a great deal. You can plan a narrative that forks, like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books. You can just say, okay, this game takes place in a very long canyon, and you start at one end and you go to the other. So there isn't a lot of narrative variation, and you can stage narrative events along the way. And that's how a great many very good games, like the Half-Life games, are staged. They're linear narratives, and you're always just being herded along to the next.
You kind of have a series of challenges, not unlike Super Mario Brothers or something like that. You beat the boss periodically.
Exactly. You basically have the same linear narrative as a roller coaster, or you have games like The Sims, for instance, which are over on the sort of procedural or emergent narrative end of the spectrum, where you have a bunch of narrative elements, and it's what we call a sandbox game. We throw them all in there and let you play with them, and a narrative kind of emerges from those interacting elements. Many people feel that that's the future of the medium. It feels the most natural to the medium. It's the gamiest. It means it means the player feels the least forced. At the same time, you're asking more of the player. So if you've had a hard day at work and you go home, you don't want to sit down on your couch and think up a story. You want to be slotted into it.
It must. It seems like a very unique challenge for a writer as well. If you're instead of trying to write cutscenes, which are just essentially, I can put this small linear thing into, various points, you're somehow having to either respond to or create responses to, like, what would the demon do if the player did this?
Exactly, and ideally, it's not as crude as that. But yes, a lot of what you write in many games are these little short pieces of dialogue that I call barks that the game will know to emit when a certain set of conditions has been met. For instance, if you are sneaking through a house, killing people as one so often does. If someone
in the world of video games, we should clarify.
So if someone else stumbles, if the maid stumbles on a dead body, you write a line of dialogue saying, "My goodness, a dead body. Whatever shall I do?" And that's a little line that gets spat out at the appropriate sort of dynamically generated moment in the game, and it expresses a little bit of your environment and the character that's saying it, and it also serves a kind of gameplay purpose. It lets the player know that their nefarious deeds, or morally justified deeds, depending, have been discovered, and now the game is going to change because the police are coming, or something like that. It's an enormously demanding job to write in the game industry. It's also enormously exciting. Anybody working in the game industry now and in the past 20 years and in the next 20 years is hammering out the terms of a new medium every day. It's super, super exciting. But then I quit.
You quit to enter like the absolutely most linear of forms, the novel, right?
Yes, that's true. I did. That's a really good point, and that's how I thought of it. I got really, really tired of like the endless head-cracking formal challenges of telling interactive narrative. When you write for games, you kind of put to one side the whole tradition and history and bag of tricks that go with telling linear narrative. Or you don't put it to one side, but you have to take them apart and put them together again. I wanted to, for instance, I wanted to tell a story. I wanted to draw on all those tricks. I wanted to tell a story the way we already know how to tell a story, or at least the way we're more comfortable doing so. And honestly, I wanted to do a lot of things. I wanted to own my own work, which one does not in the video game industry by and large. I wanted to be my own boss. I wanted to, collaborative media are wonderful. You get to go to work every day and hang out with some people instead of be by yourself. And when it all goes wrong, you can blame everybody else or a designated person that you've thought about ahead of time. I wanted to go all in. I wanted to put all my money down and say, this is something I can do. I'm going to think of it. I'm going to do it all myself. I'm responsible for it. It's mine. I wanted to have all those things.
It seems like you're also entering a medium where you can realize whatever you want to realize exceedingly easily just by writing some words on a pad, as opposed to demanding that someone create some sort of sprite.
Exactly.
There goes my knowledge of video game jargon, by the way.
No, that's good. Although a little retro in these times.
Okay.
Yes, I can say
you weren't writing Commodore 64 games.
No, although I was playing them at one point. Yes, I can write. And then an army of 1 million Roman soldiers arrived and came through the door into the parlor, and it happens. Yes, I can do that. I can change the main character's name or eye color halfway through or 3/4 of the way through. Yes, I can. I'm facing the blank page, and anything can happen on that page.
So let me ask you this, Austin, and my guest is Austin Grossman. He's the author of the novel "Soon I Will Be Invincible," which is told from the perspective jointly of a relatively new superhero and a relatively veteran supervillain. So then when you're faced with this new thing, the novel, why did you decide to go, intertextual again and create a novel that in some ways is about comic books? I mean, it's like, I don't think this while this novel is very novelistic, it's not. It couldn't stand on. It would be hard to have it stand on its two legs without the kind of iconic ideas that come from comic books.
Yeah, I'm playing on a genre we already know. It's a good question, and my terrible fear, which is occasionally realized, is that people will think that I did it as a cash-in. Superheroes are hot. Superhero novels are just beginning to be a thing. Latest in the trend of superhero novels comes Austin Grossman, as I think one review began. That's my terrible fear, was that people think I had a gimmick and I worked it.
There were some reviews that described the book as a parody or a satire of the comic book.
Yeah, and which always kind of bothered me, because I'm not making fun of the medium. Although, the book is funny, but superheroes are just funny. That's not my fault, or really my intent. I didn't. It's easy to make. People make the Mystery Men. People make fun of superheroes. It's really super easy. They're very silly people already. I wanted to write a novel because I love superhero comics, and I wanted to live in them more fully. I wanted to realize them in every detail that I could think of, and I wanted to show what they mean to me. I wanted to show what they meant to me as a reader, identifying so intensely with these very silly, but also identified with very seriously characters. So I don't even know if it's correct that I chose superhero comics. I sat down to the page and I felt like they chose me. I felt like this is the way I can get my stuff down on paper, is through this silly business of superheroes. It seemed like the way I could talk about what it's like to be a grown-up, essentially, was through those sort of settings.
There are these sort of things about superheroes that come up so often that you really explore a lot in your books. In your book, excuse me. One of them is the supervillain in the book. You spend a lot more time in the kind of in the frequent origin story of a supervillain, which is this kind of like failed academic career. And I imagine that must have some kind of resonance for you as an academic yourself. You're still a candidate, still a PhD candidate?
Still a candidate, ABD, as we say, all but dissertation.
So, just short your dissertation. I think I would imagine that the I've recovered walls of academe must have been like particularly resonant for you as well.
Well, I've always kind of responded to the fact that supervillains in particular tend to come with these honorifics, like Dr. Doom, or is it
like Dr. William Cosby,
or is it like Professor Psycho? Like they come with these academic honorifics, and I just thought, what's that about? Like, and I like that. It gives them a little bit of the sort of the gravitas of their office as a scientist. I enjoyed that, and that mixing academia with malevolence just felt really really powerful to me, and it plays on the situation, particularly of being a graduate student, where you're sort of told you're really smart, like you're in among the smarty people, but at the same time you're brutally insignificant. You're paid nothing. You're a slave to these professors who are themselves completely insignificant people, like walled off in the academy. It's a sort of humiliation that breeds a kind of maniac vision at the same time. And the idea that he had not finished his doctoral program, but in his supervillain identity, named himself Dr. Impossible, just felt like the perfect taking off point. That like where the official failed doctorate ended, like the fantasized, insane mad science doctorate began. That was the springboard, and I have to say my colleagues in the academy have enjoyed it rather a lot.
You're listening to The Sound of Young America. My guest is Austin Grossman. His book is Soon I Will Be Invincible. So you have two narrators in this book. One is Dr. Impossible, to whom we just alluded, or who we just discussed. Very classic evil scientist, supervillain, although he does have some superpowers of his own. The other is a female cyborg superhero called Fatale. She, in contrast, is a new superhero who's sort of trying to figure out her place in the superhero pantheon, I guess it would be, or just her place as a superhero and as a person in the world. She's had her past destroyed, and she's joining this kind of reformed version of a classic superhero team. Why did you choose to have her, well, for one thing, why did you choose to have her be female? But for another thing, why did you choose to have her as a new superhero as opposed to setting it from the perspective of there's another big superhero in the book Corefire who's sort of analogous to Superman.
Right. So second one first. I mean, there were a lot of reasons to have a superhero. I wanted to write about superhero life. I wanted to put somebody in the room with those superheroes as they met in their steel, meeting room in front of like the huge screen and talked about stuff.
Like on Super Friends or something.
Yeah, exactly. You couldn't put Dr. Impossible there. Frankly, Dr. Impossible doesn't have a lot of friends. Frankly, he spends a lot of time by himself. There had to be somebody else out there.
He spends a lot of time thinking about whether someone is or is not his friend. Like there's like three people who he's talked to for more than a sentence, and he spends a lot of time trying to decide whether they're his friends or not.
It's the lifestyle. What are you going to do? So I needed somebody in that room, and I sort of felt around for what kind of character I could write. And I didn't feel I could write away. I got so caught up in Dr. Impossible that I didn't feel like I could write a veteran sort of confirmed superhero. I wanted to write a superhero who wasn't sure what a superhero was. Somebody who had powers and didn't want to go rob banks, but couldn't really get a proper job. So had to sort of walk into that life and experience it as strange, but as something that they were going to try to do. Fatale ended up as a woman, and I'm not sure why. I guess I wanted to get as far away as I could from the stereotypes superhero, from Superman, Mr. Incredible, from Corefire, who kind of holds that role down in the book. I wanted to get as far away as possible from that sort of, big-chinned guy in a cape. So I wanted to add that extra layer of strangeness by making it a woman and a cyborg, the person whose own body is a bit strange to her. I don't have a better reason than that, because I kind of wrote my way into it and got the voice and figured out who it belonged to.
You get a lot of mileage out of a classic superhero trope that you just mentioned, which is the kind of what's happening to my body part of superheroism in this protagonist that you mentioned, Fatale, is not only kind of like learning about her body and how it's super, she's also lost all of her memory, and so she doesn't even really like remember what it's like to kiss someone, for example.
Yes, well, that's one of the fascinations to me about people with superpowers, the powered community, as I think of them, is that their bodies are strange to them, and that their bodies that have undergone trauma, typically, violent trauma. They're caught in an explosion, they're exiled from their planet, they fall into another dimension and back, they're bitten by a radioactive spider, which is pretty wimpy trauma. There are people who've survived trauma and it changed them. It reshaped their body. As I write in the book, superheroes carry their own story around on their bodies. It's like their personality has been kind of transferred onto their body, externalized somehow, it was fascinating to me. And then writing a novel just seemed like a way I could explore that so much more deeply and fully, like write what it felt like to be inside that body and to perceive things, through the filter of those senses, and to look at the other people around you who have those bodies and how they're all sort of vividly different from one another. It's one of those things that is immediately apparent on the comic book page, but also it's so apparent that it gets sort of passed over quickly. That person's costume is red and they glow orange. That person's costume is green and they have extra arms. In the novel, I could sort of slow it down and kind of live it more intensely and just write in those details.
One of the things that sort of a series of passages in the book that I was really into was Dr. Impossible's kind of continued justifications of why he wants to wear this big velvet cape. There's 2 or 3 different places in the book where he alludes to the fact that maybe I should just be wearing blue jeans.
Well, that was an issue because, as you know, when they did the television show Heroes, they did a superhero show, but they dispensed with the costumes and they took out that genre trope, which I feel like probably is one of the more sort of childish-seeming, fanboy-seeming features of the medium. They've got the powers. Why do they dress up like that? But I wanted to keep it. When I wrote the novel, I made a sort of pact with myself that I was going to play it straight, that I was going to trust the genre. And anything that was from the superhero genre, well, it was going to go into my book and I would make it feel human. So I meant having to sort of deal with the kind of personalities that would actually want to dress up. I think it's very interesting. Like Batman, for instance. Batman is a classic person, doesn't even have any powers, but he dresses as a bat. And he takes on another identity. And yeah, people rationalize it as, he needs a secret identity. But let's face it, he also wants to look like a bat. He wants to be under the banner of the bat. He wants to sort of make himself a kind of thing that is a sort of hybrid between a human being and a symbol. He wants to have, it's a kind of mask theater. It's something extra happens when you put on a mask and a costume. It's like a uniform, but you're the only person wearing that uniform. You're not even part of an organization. It's something. There's some kind of alchemical change that when you add person to mask, that is very exciting. I was actually inspired by. Now my memory is escaping me. 60s woman photographer killed herself.
When you said 60s, I was ready with Adam West, but...
No. That woman, the photographer, she took those art photographs. This is tragic. This is escaping me. They recently did that Nicole Kidman film about her for... Anyway, whatever. She took photographs of people wearing masks.
There's people in the audience right now yelling the name at us.
Yes, they are, and soon I'll be one of them. Anyway, she took pictures of ordinary people wearing masks, and it's this incredibly powerful combination of silliness and somehow iconic dread. Something happens when you put on a mask. Anyway, so long way of saying I wanted to include that element because it's weird, but it belongs.
There's this, there's something for which I was trying to think of what the question was besides comment on this, but I failed completely before you came over here. There's this very clear theme in the book of this battle between technology, magic, and something else. I can't remember what the other thing I thought of was. But in terms of the powers and in terms of the way that Dr. Impossible transforms himself and is constantly describing himself as a man of science and so on and so forth, and the way that Fatale kind of struggles with her own cybernetic body anyway. So the question is, comment on that.
Right. Well, superhero is almost a meta genre because it's eaten up other kinds of genres. You have people who are space aliens. You have people who are kind of film noir characters. You have people who are mythological characters or sort of fantasy literature characters, and they're all kind of mashed together. And like on like the Super Friends, they have to like live together, even though Superman is a space alien, and Wonder Woman is like Amazonian.
And the Wonder
princess.
Twins are children's cartoon characters.
Yes, some people don't even have any rationale for what they do. Like, what even holds Superman up? No one even bothers to think about that. Anyway, so it just made sense to me
it's
that
because there's less gravity or something.
it made sense to me that if you put those characters next to each other, they would feel a little uneasy together. Like somebody who's a cyborg, like the cyborg in my book doesn't really get along with the fairy, because like the cyborg doesn't make sense to the fairy, and the fairy doesn't even make sense to the cyborg. They didn't belong in the same book together. It just felt like those types would give off a little, just kind of a weird, have a different energy to each other.
There's a set piece in the book where, and it's relatively far along, but I hope I'm not revealing too much. But there's a set piece where one of the heroes, who's a magician, kind of captures Dr. Impossible in this kind of nightmare of magic, and it's really dreadful not in the judgment sense, but in the sense that it fills one with dread, because you feel this terror of Dr. Impossible being powerless because he doesn't understand how the magic works.
Right. I love it when those little genre sort of paradigms just completely clash. Like a mad scientist fights an actual like wizard. Like, what terms is that battle even going to be fought on? Like, it doesn't even make sense.
You mentioned, I think, in the book about how the magician character always seems to be fighting something magic that no one else ever has to deal with.
Right. Well, I mean, I took that straight out of like the old Doctor Strange comics, where like Doctor Strange has his own villains and his own like problems that like the other superheroes are not even involved with. Like nobody else ever fought like the Dread Dormammu, that guy from another dimension with all the swirls around him, because like, can you even punch that guy? His head is like this flaming sphere. Like, can you even? What can you do with that if you're Batman? Frankly, you just want to leave it alone. Okay, I know it's I did a Marvel DC gaff there, but like, yeah, what do you even do about that?
This is public radio. Nobody cares.
Oh, you'll be surprised.
I'll hear from the podcast audience.
Only Doctor Strange doesn't even knows how to begin dealing with that kind of mess. So yes. That's the kind of genre divisions and genres bumping up against one another that, like, it's just tremendous fun to write about.
Something that I was wondering about, you said you described costumes as being perceived as one of the more childish associations of comic books. And I mean, it's very clear that you're a comic book fan now, and I'm going to go ahead and presume that, like most adult comic fans, you started off as a comic fan when you were a kid.
All right, I'll go there.
Okay. So what I'm wondering is whether these were issues that about comic books, the issues that you just talked about addressing, like, what's happening to my body thing, or the different kinds of people, the different worlds colliding thing. Are these things that ever occurred to you when you were a kid, or are these things that occur to you now and you look at comics in a different way?
I think I at least picked up on something when I was, a child, like reading comics. And properly speaking, I didn't get that much into comics until I was, I think, 12 or 13. I watched the Super Friends when I was super little, but that was probably it for me. I just remember sort of poring over panels, like just staring at a panel and like thinking out, like, oh, that person's moving over there. Oh, it's interesting that when that person's flying, she points her toes. I wonder if she taught herself to do that because it looked better. Like, I guess I wrote a novel that somewhat drew on how I read comics, on how I lingered over details or made up details that the panels didn't show us, just to sort of make it to be more fully in that world. I guess I did somewhat write the book as I read comics, and I think I articulated emotions and thoughts that I didn't quite make it through to consciousness when I was reading them when I was an early teen person, or even when I watched the Super Friends when I was really little. But that, like, I used the medium of the novel to bring to consciousness and make human. Because even if the characters that we're identifying with are really stylized and aren't really that human, like the emotions attached to them are human. And that's kind of what I wanted to put into the book, even if I didn't quite have possession of those when I originally got into superheroes.
So you, the book is very specifically, it very much lives in the novel form. Now that it's done, have you imagined what it would be like in other media? I mean, I imagine the book has been very well reviewed and reasonably successful. I can't imagine that you don't have a lot of people trying to license it for other formats. Have you thought about how it would be different in a different medium?
I have. We are actually thinking about a film for it. We're actually working on that, and it is a huge question how to translate the kind of sensibility that has been realized in prose into another form, especially when superhero films, I feel, have had indifferent success in quite realizing the excitement of having superheroes in real life. I have thought about it. I think my feeling is that when superheroes are shot, I'm going to stick to film because I haven't even thought that much about other media, that when superheroes are shot on film, there's a great effort to translate the comic book sensibility into film that seems to work against what I feel is the grain of the medium. You can't quite hide the fact that you have actors in suits in a film. And so you're trying to make living actors kind of into cartoons. And I think to make a film of this novel, you would work the opposite way. I mean, you have the huge richness of having your characters represented by breathing human beings, and to bring that awkwardness onto film instead of trying with millions and millions of dollars of computer effects to hide it. I mean, costumes are almost always changed when they do the film version, and it's impossible to reproduce the fluidity and the skin tightness of costumes in the comics in film. Because frankly, when you draw a superhero in the comics, you just draw a naked person, hide the genitals, and then color it in yellow or whatever, and that's how you get a skin tight superhero costume. You can't do that on film, although sometimes it comes pretty close. But just to not hide, but to work from the awkwardness of having human beings on a screen is something I think that could work really powerfully in doing a film version, because this novel is built on the idea of envisioning superheroes and villains as human people.
It's one of the things I read recently about the upcoming Batman film is that the great innovation of the film, technically speaking, was that they made it so Batman could turn his head.
Yes, there are many things I loved about the Tim Burton initial Batman film, but the costume was kind of a misfire, I feel.
I know. I think you and me are probably on the same page with Joel Schumacher. The problem was no nipples, right?
Right. Yes. So yes, I'm really looking forward to what they're doing in the upcoming Batman and the Watchman film that they're making. I think that the really great superhero film has yet to be made. Who knows? Perhaps one day I will make it.
Or maybe the guy who directed The 300 will.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've tracked what he's doing with Watchmen, and I have to say that like everything he said has sounded right to me so far. I like the fact that they didn't cast major stars. I'm in Hollywood talking about second guessing a film director. I'm killing my ear as I speak. It's dying on radio. But I like everything he said. I'm incredibly attached to the Watchmen property, but so far everything he said has made me think, yeah, that sounds about right.
Austin, before we finish up, do you want to read something from your book? You've been holding it this whole time.
Oh, I hold it because I'm afraid that I will forget what it is.
That's exactly why I always keep the book in front of me. People are always perplexed by the fact that I don't have notes, and then they realize that the notes I do keep is the book, so I don't forget what the name of it is, which I have done with interviews where I didn't have the book in front of me.
Yes, that is exactly why I have it. Heck, what would I read were I to read something? I should have had this. I should have had this in mind. Well, I could read this bit here. It's only just a bit. I guess it's just about a page.
Go for it.
This is the supervillain talking. Once you get past a certain threshold, everyone's problems are the same. Fortifying your island and hiding the heat signature from your fusion reactor. My first subterranean lab was a disastrous little hole underneath a suburban tract home. One morning, 2 unsmiling men in leotards appeared on my doorstep and demanded to see what I was working on. I said it doesn't do anything. They didn't say anything. I showed them inside. I kept my back to them while I worked my fancy locks, but who was I kidding? The one in white had that look people do when they have X-ray vision. Like they're seeing just bones. I'd been as careful as I could, buying equipment from a dozen aliases, some of them legit government agencies. Waste heat going into the aquifer. There was enough background radiation, no one should have caught anything, but obviously I'd hit one of their tripwires. We didn't say anything on the way down. Up close, these 2 weren't especially reassuring. The white one's eyes were set too far apart, and he only breathed about once a minute, rapidly in and out. I didn't get much on the black guy, except that in the silences I could hear faint, tinny voices and bursts of static, as if a cybernetic component in his chest were inadvertently picking up shortwave. It was vaguely embarrassing, like a fart.
Austin Grossman, thank you so much for being on The Sound of Young America.
Thank you.
Austin Grossman's new book is called Soon I Will Be Invincible. There's another Sound of Young America for you. I've been your host, Jesse Thorn, America's radio sweetheart. The show's produced by Speaking Into Microphones. Our theme music, written and performed by Dan Grayson with help from myself. The music underneath me right now, provided by Dan Wally. I hope you'll visit us online at MaximumFun.org, where you will find our daily updated blog and our lively discussion forums. Feel free to download and share this video, which is downloadable for free from Google Video, embeddable from Google Video, or downloadable via torrent from MySpleen. If you need a MySpleen invitation, just send me an email. Or if you have thoughts about the show, do the same. Jesse at MaximumFun.org.